Hello and welcome to Toolbox. In this video, we'll be looking at our new Mesh Combine system as part of the Toolbox kit, which is available through Canopy. The Mesh Combine tool allows us to merge meshes, reduce the amount of data that needs to be sent to the GPU, and in turn helps to boost performance of our project. You can find a link to the download in the Canopy website by going to Downloads, Tools and Utilities, PW Toolbox, and downloading the zip file here. Simply extract the zip file containing the Unity package and import that Unity package into your project. Now, the most important thing to note before we start is that you should always be profiling these results against your target hardware. Different hardware will be better at performing certain things than others. So profiling your performance between two devices may give drastically different results. With that in mind, let's get started. In this video, we're using Cinti's Polygon Fantasy Kingdom pack with the demo assets from the Demo Scenes folder. If we hit play, we'll notice that the scene is doing quite a lot of work in order to render this environment. There are various ways that we can improve this scene in order to enhance our frame count. We could combine all of the meshes that use the same materials so that Unity doesn't have that many draw calls per frame. We could also split those meshes into chunks to limit the amount of combined objects we're seeing in our environment. We could further improve this by using static batching and setting up culling distances on our camera for a huge boost in performance. And then we could also add LOD groups to those game objects so that we don't see them if our camera is too far away. This is where the Procedural Worlds Toolbox comes in. To open the PW Toolbox, go to Window, Procedural Worlds, Toolbox, and select the main window. Next, we're going to open the Combine Meshes panel. This tool has a couple of settings on how to combine meshes. In order to start combining meshes, we need to start by selecting a root game object that contains all of our meshes that we wish to combine. In this case, this will be our non-optimized root game object. It's also worth noting that this is where the combined meshes will be parented to once the process is over. Next, we need to define the processes that need to take place when combining these meshes. These are called combine commands, and by default, the PW Toolbox comes with 4 of them. We have small objects, medium objects, large objects, and extra large objects. We can see that there are quite a bit of settings that we can configure. Now, before we can get into these, let's first click on the Debug Performance option so that we can test our default settings with this scene, and then click Combine Meshes. As you can see, the PW Toolbox has generated a new game object in the scene called the FPS Tester. It contains all of the combined meshes in our scene, as well as a UI for displaying the performance at runtime. Let's go ahead and click play to see the performance improvements. Our original game objects are rendering at roughly 33 frames per second. If we click Optimize, we'll notice that we're getting a significant improvement to our frames overall. This improvement will vary as we move our camera around the scene. But there are many ways we can further improve our performance overall. Let's first look at how this performance is possible. If we go to our scene, we can see that the original, or unoptimized, game object contains a ton of individual objects. While Unity does perform some optimizations during runtime, this still causes a huge overhead in several factors of our game. Unity would need to generate a heap more shadow maps, a ton more draw calls, all while trying to batch all of the objects in attempts to reduce the amount of draw calls. However, if we look at the optimized game object, you can see that it contains a bunch of combined meshes. This ultimately frees up Unity from having to batch the objects during runtime. And because this scene contains objects with different materials, the overall draw call count is reduced drastically, and thus there would be far less shadow maps generated. There are various configurations we can make to improve the frame rate further based on the design of our level. The first is by using static batching. Static batching enhances performance by reducing the number of render state changes between draw calls. The objects you choose to be static are the ones that don't move in your scene. Fortunately, there are objects in this particular scene that don't move at all. So I'll just mark all of them as static, including the children. To show the impact on performance, let's hit play. Then we're going to open up our frame debugger by going to Window, Analysis, Frame Debugger. If we hit Enable on the frame debugger, we'll notice that Unity is rendering a heap of different objects with separate materials. However, if we switch over to our optimized objects and switch on our frame debugger once more, we can see that our draw call count is much lower. Unity is doing far less work to render our scene, and thus we have more frames as a result. The next is by using the Occlusion Culling system. You can find this under the Window tab, Rendering, and go to the Occlusion Culling option. This works by reducing the amount of game objects rendered within the camera frustum. Therefore, those objects will not be drawn off screen, further improving performance. Simply disable the original game objects so that they don't get included in the bake, and perform the Occlusion Culling on the optimized game object. And then bake our occlusions. Once this is done, you can see this in action by hitting the play button and opening the scene view. As you can see, with the occlusion window open, you can rotate the camera and see what gets culled by Unity. Let's look at the overall impact this technique has on the performance of our level. Here we have a scene with the occlusion culling turned off, and our camera is looking directly at this wall with a majority of the objects hidden behind the wall. If we hit play, we can see that with our original objects, we're getting roughly 31 frames per second. But if we optimize, we're still benefiting from the performance improvements that the PW Toolbox provides. Here we have our scene with Unity's baked occlusion culling system enabled. If we hit play, we can now see that with the original objects, we are now getting a significant improvement to our frames overall because Unity is rendering far less objects than it originally did. However, if we optimize our project further with the PW Toolbox, we can see that we're getting almost double the performance improvement because we're using both the optimizations in the PW Toolbox as well as Unity's occlusion culling system. That's a huge 725% improvement from our original scene without any of the optimizations we've done up to this point. Another technique we can use to improve our performance in our project is by using layer distance culling. This allows us to control culling of our objects based on how far they are from the camera. We're going to start by adding a few more layers to our Unity project. To do this, we're going to go to Layers and then select Edit Layers. Starting on layer 6, we're going to create PW Object Small, PW Object Medium, and PW Object Large. Once we have our new layers added to our project, go to the PW Toolbox, select the first Combine command, and select Add Layer Culling. This allows us to set an object distance, our shadow distance, and we can also set the visibility colors between. We also want to set up the layer that we want our objects to be set to when we combine them, which will be PW Object Small in this case. If we move our camera, we'll be able to see the visualizer for the object distance cutoff, which is in yellow. If we update the object distance, we'll be able to see how far the objects will be culled from the camera. We can also see the visualizer for the shadow distance, which is in blue. Next, we're going to set the medium objects to have the PW Object Medium layer, and then we're going to tick Add Layer Culling for that as well. There are some decent defaults for each one of these combine commands, but you can modify them as you see fit in your project. Lastly, we're going to select the large objects, and we're going to set that to the PW Object Large layer, and then we're also going to select Add Layer Culling for that as well. For the extra large objects, these are fairly huge, so I won't need to tick the Add Layer Culling option for this combine command. Once you have combined all the meshes, please make sure that you remove the old ones before we start to test this again. After you've combined the new meshes, you'll notice that on the camera, the system has added a PW Culling System script. This has set up all of our layers and their distances for shadows and objects based on the settings that we've put in our combine commands. If you wish to see more of a preview of these culling distances, you can edit these values and see the updates live in the game view. If we hit play, we'll notice that the original objects are rendering at roughly 33 frames per second. If we hit optimize, we're still getting a huge impact on performance. But then if we move our camera around the scene, we can see that our optimized objects are still rendering at a significant amount of frames in a lot of different scenarios of our project. In summary, we've gone from an unoptimized scene that Unity struggled to render due to the amount of game objects that we've had render in our scene, to an optimized scene that utilizes various rendering performance techniques along with static batching, occlusion culling, and layer distance culling in order to achieve a wild surge of performance with our project. This was also achieved in mere minutes thanks to the PW Toolbox. If you wish to learn more about the PW Toolbox, head over to Canopy and go to Library, then select Utilities, and there you'll find how to use the PW Toolbox article. You can find the links in the description of this video. If you like this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to stay tuned for more procedural content. As always, thanks for watching.